Hi guys, so this is Katie. That's me. Hi. So I went a little crazy with this project. I'm actually going to cover 6 books today. So the genre I chose is poetry. So that's one of my favorites. I'm a big lover of fiction, but it's like, how do you pick, one awesome fiction book or even, 4? There's just too many. So I wanted to start with where I got my start in poetry, Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. I love this book. It's amazing. I used to have a copy of it, but I lost it. So most of Shel Silverstein's poetry books for children have white and black cover. But this one is special. So it's got the silver cover. So it makes you wonder, what else is extra inside of it? What makes this extra special? So this particular edition has 12 extra poems. And one thing I wanted to focus on the front cover is the font. I think it is really cool. So I love how they do like all the extra little effects. So you can see that they changed it a little bit from like how different the E's look. So this particular E in sidewalk is elongated. It just looks really cool. So the sidewalk in particular, it makes you think of walking on sidewalks. So you see like the little K, how they kind of stretched it and made it look like they were 2 little feet walking. And I love this S. I think it's really beautiful. All right. And then it's just a really fitting choice. So like I said, it was where I got my start in poetry. And the drawings are particularly one thing that I think attracts kids. So they're just kooky and fun. And it really brings kids in. It's like, oh, these drawings are fun, but this poetry is also cool. I also really love the font that they use. So in a lot of poetry, it makes it easier. So if the font is like a serif, but you mostly just see that classic font that you see in books everywhere. I don't really see a lot of deviation most of the time, but here he actually uses a font, and it's just a little fun and different. Okay, what else? So I really love how they formatted this book. So Shel Silverstein sometimes has some really interesting line breaks. So he'll break the lines at different points. And and so it's just really important to get the formatting right. And they did that, and it looks really nice with all the drawings. Okay, so that's that one. So this other one that I have is from a series called Poetry for Young People. This is for Langston Hughes. So I didn't discover Langston Hughes until college, but what I like about this is the fact that it's for kids. So they've made it for kids. So it won a Coretta Scott King Award for excellence in African American literature. And the drawings also, again, so it's kind of like I'm doing picture books, but I'm not really. But the drawings are so beautiful. And I love the title font. So it is everywhere in this book, and I love it. It's just a little different. And also about the back. So they put reviews from the rest of the series on here, which is actually really smart. Look at all these awesome poets and other authors that they have done a book about their stuff. So that's awesome. And this is a great way to get kids excited about literature, which I am all about, because I'm a tutor. And so all the time I'm talking to kids about like Percy Jackson and Harry Potter. And here's a series that, does it all. And they have reviews here. So from a marketing standpoint, this is really smart. Okay. And the design is a 2-page spread. So this one has 2 poems, but most of it is only 1 poem. So the art goes on both sides usually, and it's really gorgeous. So here's that cool font again for the title of the poem, and the art is just gorgeous. So the illustrator is Benny Andrews, and he apparently won a big art award for this, and it's no wonder. This art is amazing. Okay, what else? So the type hierarchy. So my first poem, the very first one, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. So a lot of these poems, like Langston Hughes is like a deep poet. It's like, unless you can really find the deeper meaning, it's hard to understand what's going on. And so what they did that was really smart was add a lot of context about the time period. And just context where they can understand it better. And at the bottom, they have definitions of words that might be harder for the kids to understand. And so in this particular poem, they define the Euphrates, the Congo, and the Nile rivers, just so they can get some understanding about where it is that they're talking about and possibly where in history, which I think is really cool. And so it's really important when you have all this text on the page to have a good hierarchy, and it really does make it easier to read. I think it's really awesome. Okay. All right, next is the Complete Poems of Emily Dickinson. So this particular edition has every single poem she's ever written, and she wasn't actually famous for her poetry until after she died. Very little of it was published before her death. And so I really like the cover and the font here. It's just classic and pretty, and I honestly just thought that this particular silhouette was just of a woman. She's like the everyday woman, you know, in that time period. She's kind of an enigma because, you know, she didn't really necessarily have the training to be a poet, and the fact that she is kind of a miracle. But it's actually, it says on the back, the color illustration is a silhouette of Emily Dickinson cut in 1845, courtesy of the Amherst College Library. So this is actually a silhouette of her, which I think is really neat. Okay. The editor was also very smart. So there are hundreds of poems in here. This book is, how long? 770 pages, y'all. That's long. So there's like 3 different indexes in the back of this book, which is helpful because Emily Dickinson's poems all have numbers. They don't have titles, and so it is super handy to be able to have an index where you can find it by the first line, or you can find it by the subject matter. And what helps is, so a lot of her poems use like personification and things like that. And so rather than having to look it up under what the personification means, it's really like user friendly in that you can use the index and find out. So if she did one about, she had one about birds and hope. So you can look it up by birds and still find the poem that you were looking for. And that one's one of my favorite, by the way. It's called Hope is a Thing with Feathers. It's awesome. Okay. That's it for that one. All right, next, William Shakespeare. If we're going to talk about poetry, we have to talk about William Shakespeare, right? And so this is a book of only his sonnets and his narrative poetry, so it doesn't have any of the plays in it, so it can be a little smaller, but still, it's like, this guy wrote a lot, and for good reason. He's a genius. Okay, and what I like about this, it's really simple cover, the design, but it's really pretty. So if, like, you see, my video quality is not that great, but if you see, like, all the design around the words, like, it's simple, but it's classic, right? And I love this little bookmark, this little ribbon right here. It's so pretty, right? So, yeah, it's just super cool. So, and there's also this intro in the book from the editor. I thought it was kind of odd that they didn't have the editor's name on the front. And I thought that they could have done a better job. So it's from the Everyman's Library. So that's a series where they've done a lot of classic works. And they really missed it, I think. Like on the back, they talked about like her introduction, but they didn't really market the rest of this particular book series, which I think would have been really smart. Okay. So again, the type hierarchy. So there's even more on this one than there was on the other one. So the font's a lot smaller. And so they chose to go with a classic font here. So like I said, a serif font is really handy with reading poetry, especially ones that are kind of intense, like the narrative poems and such. It's handy to be able to have that serif line showing you, telling your eye where to go so you don't lose track. And then, of course, they have all of the footnotes here at the bottom, which explain context and definitions of some of the more archaic words that he uses. All right. All right. I've not actually read this one before. This is Howl and Other Poems by Allen Ginsberg. So I heard that this was kind of a cool poet to check out. I found it on a couple of lists, and I was like, I should look this up. And I did. So I think we've talked about on the discussion board before about how books that were considered obscene, really called into question where I was going with that. Called into question, like who could write what, who could read what, and this was part of the discussion in America. So he uses some imagery with some interesting bits of anatomy that made people feel like it was obscene. So it was part of a lawsuit, I think. And so I actually think that the use of a pocket edition here was actually really smart. So this was the second time that the book was published. And yeah, I just think that's smart. So if you didn't want to be caught, reading this risque book, then you could have this little pocket edition, stick it in your purse, and no one's none the wiser. So I honestly think that every adult should read this at some point. This man's a genius. like what he went through, it's nuts. And so if you read this, you're going to come away with like what he was feeling in his heart about the time period, and it's fascinating. Okay, and another thing, so look at this. This book, you guys, is 58 years old. I think that's really awesome. So it was clearly very well made. So the binding, it's still together. This book is really old, but it still looks beautiful and nice. Yeah. And again, very classic font, but very easy to read. So clearly they wanted his poetry to take center stage, and that's the way it should be. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I hope that this means that, no one's barely touched it, because like I said, he's a genius. That would make me really sad. Yeah, and his line breaks are in even stranger places than Shel Silverstein's are. And so it's really important that they kept the formatting the way it was and kept true to the design of how he wanted his poetry to look, and they really did. And it looks amazingly different. And, I wrote some poetry myself in high school whenever I was, full of teen angst. And, some of my lines looked a lot like that. And, I got some of mine published in the high school literary magazine, and they did not do a good job of keeping my lines that way. So it was really cool to see that the editor actually respected that. All right. And last but not least, so this is 100 Essential American Poems. It's edited by Leslie M. Pockle. So I think the design of this particular cover is really cool. I think it's really abstract, so it conjures up the image in your brain of American flag without, hitting you in the face. So it makes you think of America, which is awesome. So there's every poet you would expect to be in here. We've got Emerson, Longfellow, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Gosh, what else? Langston Hughes is in here. Amazing Grace, so many things. And so they talk about that on the back. And so that they're putting a preview of what's in here. So they're giving you some surprises, but then every poet you think would be in here is in here. There's so many poems in here. I also like how simple the font is on the cover. I think it's classic. I think it looks good, and there's no need to apply that classic reading font with the serif line to everything. This just makes it a little bit more interesting. However, what does bug me is the fact that the title isn't capitalized. The editor in me just wants to fix it, and well, I can't. All right. Yeah, so this book is only 8 years old. It's clearly been loved, judging by the edges of the pages. I know my quality of my video here is not great, but it's been well loved, this book, and I love that. And the fact that the binding is still together and really strong. So I don't know what these bindings are called yet, but I hope to learn pretty soon. But this has clearly been made quite well. And yeah, I really love how they have that extra little ribbon of fabric there at the top. It makes the book look more beautiful. Okay. Oh, and you know something else I forgot to mention. So I was anticipating some of these, you know, just with the older authors that were more considered more classic reading and more for adult would have like the thicker pages, higher quality paper. But actually, the one that had the most high quality paper was the Langston Hughes book. So these pages are really thick, and sometimes whenever you're reading, you think you have two in your hand, but you don't. These are actually really strong, thick paper. It's really pretty. And of course, the art again. Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Look at that. Okay. So that's all the books. There's a lot of them, I know. So I really enjoyed this. I went to the library and just kind of hunted these down. So like lots of my books I wound up having to give away because I moved around a lot for a while. And so, yeah, I don't have that many of the books that I used to have, and so I miss them a lot. So it was really fun to go to the library and pick out all these poetry books. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know, like, your opinion in the discussion board. I really enjoyed all the presentations I've seen so far. I'm looking forward to seeing what the rest of you have. Hope y'all have a good day. Happy Friday.